Thanks. I really do eat way too much candy. Before I get started, I'm Bryan Kennedy. I'm an exhibit developer at the Science Museum in Minnesota. I'm going to be speaking about a couple things that I do at the Science Museum in Minnesota, but not necessarily about everything that Science Museum in Minnesota does. Just wanted to make that clear before I get started. I have recently undertaken a project to try to do some things a different way at the museum. Some traditional things that we might do is teach you about how gravity works. You know, you jump up in the air and you fall down. And while we've built exhibits like this about established principles in science with a very sort of singular fashion, where the institution inside of the institution's walls with a lot of experts and people who know about science and education communicate that to the public, this doesn't necessarily work for all things that you're coming across in science today, right? So there's new concepts in science every day. There's new issues, things like cloning, right? So if you're trying to think about how do you engage the public on an issue like cloning, that one-way flow of information isn't going to necessarily work, because there's not an absolute truth about how cloning works or whether we should even be doing cloning. There's a lot of social ramifications around a topic like cloning. So we really need to change our process of how we develop exhibits and get more out in the community, mixing in with the people who are actually experiencing our exhibits. We need to think about how we get their voices into the exhibits themselves, and even turn over control of what the content of those exhibits, turn over that control to our audience, especially for these new types of things where opinion matters more than absolute fact. In a lot of ways, we're copying a lot of trends that are already happening on the web with many of the tools that you see up here. We're aping a lot of trends. The internet is causing a remarkable revolution where the people who are viewing the content are becoming the content creators, and we want to think about how we do that. Now, we recognize that there's some issues with trust with this new approach, right? Museums are an incredibly trusted source of information, and we don't want to throw that away. But we still want to try to figure out how we find the balance of sort of retaining the audience's trust, but getting in these new voices, okay? So one of the main projects that I work on is a website and an exhibit at the museum called Science Buzz. And Science Buzz is all about contemporary issues in science. Stories like cloning, stories like nanotechnology. And we really do ask for visitor input on almost all levels of what we do. In many ways, we use the web to allow visitors to create content as they come to the museum. This has allowed us to do things like create an exhibit about Hurricane Katrina as it was rolling in to the New Orleans coast. We had an exhibit up on the floor where people could have their pictures up from Flickr of Hurricane Katrina coming through as the exhibit was coming, as the hurricane was rolling into the coast. Now, the reason that we do this in the museum is because people feel very smart in our museum settings. People feel engaged about science. And we recognize that by doing that actually at the museum, we can get people who wouldn't normally do something talking about science or providing their perspective on science at home. Another example of this is getting people's perspective on the 35W bridge collapse. We had features online that allowed people to debate why did the bridge collapse. We had volunteers from the museum who are retired civil engineers debating things like whether pigeon poop was corrosive enough to make the bridge collapse. This is a picture of a euthanasia machine, something that you might see in a science museum. This is at the Science Museum of London. Euthanasia is a particular issue that has a social ramification to a scientific breakthrough. Science is making people live longer and longer, and we're asking the question as whether that's actually right. So we need to open that question up to the audience. And this is an example of an exhibit that we had where we actually asked people what did they think about euthanasia in various different scenarios. And we saw some really remarkable stories told from what people's experience were. You can imagine a lot of our visitors have very personal experiences with that scientific concept. Sometimes people ask, why should science museums be asking these social questions? One of the reasons we think this is important because we have to define ourselves in these spaces. In 2005, if you searched Science Museum blog on the internet, the Creation Museum was the #1 hit. So we know that we need to define ourselves in these social spaces. One of the things that we're going to be doing here in a little bit is taking this project online with a group of mentors, teens who are being mentored online with adults, and try to figure out how mentors can be engaged in debating scientific issues online and providing their unique perspective on these social issues. One of the other final steps that we want to try to take around this is look at how we can use new online social tools around mapping to provide new perspectives on environmental science. Environmental issues are incredibly important today, and we think that mapping those issues is a really cool way that we could possibly give people new perspectives on that. Using Google Maps and tools like Google Earth, where you can browse the entire Earth and also see the depletion of our ice caps. You can browse right onto Greenland and see the glaciers breaking up right here and actually tell us your perspective on those kinds of problems. This is a new prototype that we've just rolled out called the Rain Table that is going to try to interface with some of those social mapping tools. You can make it rain on this digital topography, and as it rains, it flows downhill, and you can actually see how pollution affects the rain across these maps. Maybe visitors could come in and map their own environments on this. Use this sort of tool as to make advocacy for their different political causes and social, and the pollution in their environment, and try to tell their own stories. We want to try to experiment with how people are creating content in tools like Google Maps and how that could affect exhibits at the museum as well. This is a final example I just wanted to show. This is Science on a Sphere, which is a really large-scale globe that we can project different data sets on. Maybe we can try to take tools like Google Earth and project people's user-generated maps onto this globe here so that people can see environmental stories from a global perspective. And I just wanted to finish with the fact that all of these things require user participation. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you guys. What are some other things that you would like to see in the exhibits at the Science Museum of Minnesota? Thank you.